North Carolina still needs to be a priority. We, as in North Carolina, needs to lock up the state first and foremost, and expand out from there. Depending on grabbing kids from California every year isn't sustainable. I want both your comments on that, and I'll tell you why being North Carolina central base recruiting is important, I think, because I think in the transfer portal era, when guys are so far from home, wherever that may be, if things go south, they're more tempted to leave. And I also think local kids will play for a NIL discount for their flagship or their in-state schools as well. We saw it with Hampton. We saw it with Drake May. Greg, your comments on in-state recruiting, and then Don can get in here after he's had time to marinate.
Well, look, I think the great example is Roy Williams, right? Because when Roy Williams was at Kansas in the middle of the country, he could recruit the entire country. And he had a lot of really good players from California. So when he came to North Carolina 22 years ago, he signed a number of kids from California, the Ware twins, Alex Stevenson, Larry Drew. He went after, I guess Jaylen Brown was a California kid who they missed out on. All those kids transferred out. And I guess Dion was another one, but Dion stayed. But what Roy Williams realized, to your point, is that, yeah, you can get them to come, but homesickness is a real thing. And if the environment's not perfect, they're going to get that itch to kind of go back closer to home. And so he quit recruiting California kids for the most part. And if you're talking about a Hall of Fame coach, one of the best to ever do it is having those types of problems. And, Carolina is a national recruiter anyway on the basketball side of things. So when you switch gears over to football, Mack Brown, his first time in Chapel Hill was very North Carolina centric, and of course went up into the Tidewater. When he came back the second time, he wasn't as much about dominating in state as he was dominating the footprint. And that footprint was Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina and down into Georgia and maybe even down to Florida a little bit. So regional, but not necessarily in state quite as much, for the same reasons. And he talked about that. If you've got kids where their families can come and watch them, that sticks. That's some glue, even if maybe they're not playing as much as they would like to. And I think that's just a crucial component of it. It's interesting to see, but there just are not many programs that can recruit nationally. Notre Dame obviously does it, but there's not many others. Even Alabama and Georgia, they're very local in how they recruit.
Don, your take here.
No, I agree. Notre Dame is the only true example I could think of that recruits nationally, and doesn't have like a base in state, mostly because Indiana doesn't have great football. And so, but Georgia, which does recruit nationally, but a good chunk of their classes are always the Peach State. Same thing with Alabama. The one kind of example, Clemson. And some of that is because South Carolina is a weird state to where I guess annually is top heavy, but not very deep. So you can't just rely just purely on South Carolina talent. You have to kind of venture out. But yeah, I think, I'll take it in a different direction. I think that, with Mack Brown, and I think I'll push back a little bit on Greg. I don't think he's incorrect. I mean, he was definitely correct. Mack kind of focused on the 6-hour driving distance, the radius that he focused on. Early on, he focused in-state because we had like a historical in-state class in the 2021 class. But after that, the talent just really, really dropped in the state. Now it's picking up, and the 2026 class is actually going to be a really good class. But so I think that kind of forced him to go out of state a little bit more. And then also you have the NIL, and so he started kind of focusing on different types of kids a little bit. But anyway, going back to the original question, there is some momentum that can be had. Now, kids are not going to, if you land one kid, that doesn't mean you're going to get his best friend or his teammate. That's not a guarantee, but it helps. And what we saw in the 21 class, remember the 4-star Mageddon everybody loved, everyone was super excited for?
The TikTok video of the Virginia guys.
That was in the 2022 class, I believe. But yeah, I mean, you can build that sort of momentum and you can play off of it. And when you have these recruiting events, and what ended up happening is they would have these recruiting events where it's much easier to get in-state guys to visit your campus much more frequently than it is for a kid from New Jersey. It just is, from a logistics standpoint and from a financial standpoint. I know a lot of the kids that he's messing with in New Jersey have money, so financially it doesn't matter as much to them, but logistically it is a factor. Whereas if you're in Charlotte, you can easily make the trip up to Chapel Hill a few times a year in the off season. And if you're seeing the same guys and they're talking to each other, they're on the same 7-on-7 team. That was the other part. It was that North Carolina recruited a lot. They didn't recruit the Carolina Stars particularly, but they recruited a lot of guys at the 7-on-7 program. And when those guys are traveling, if you're traveling with a kid who's committed to North Carolina and he's your roommate for the weekend, that makes an impact. And so I do think that those sort of things do help. And I also think that while nowadays you don't have to rely so much on the high school coach as you would have 15, 20 years ago, but if you're in a good spot with that high school coach, that definitely helps. And it helps with, let's say you need to get a kid to campus in 2 weeks. Maybe the high school coach can't take them, but he knows an assistant coach who would love to go to Chapel Hill, and he can set you up with him. If you don't have that relationship with that high school coach because you haven't been by that school, then it's harder for you to be like, hey, can you help me out here, and have that guy actually help you out. So I think there's a lot of things in addition to, and I 100% agree with what Greg was talking about the homesickness, and what Tommy was talking about, which is a great point, is, yeah, you take a kid from LA and he comes to North Carolina, if he even comes to North Carolina, and let's say he absolutely blows up and is this, whatever, like a cornerback who is projected to go in the top 2 rounds of the draft in the next draft. Well, Southern Cal is like, wow, we need to improve our secondary. So, I mean, it's easy sell, or even not even Southern Cal. It could be anyone, just throw a bunch of money that, North Carolina can't compete with. And while Belichick certainly is being well funded by the university, he really, if you look at what he's done, he's not getting into bidding wars, even in the transfer portal. I mean, he's taking guys, as Greg kind of mentioned, the value stuff. So, yeah, I think taking care of your home state is important. And thus far, there hasn't been any evidence of that. Obviously, they can come out in spring recruiting and completely change that and make it more of a priority.